Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the Bankhead National Forest, deep in the remote hollows of northwest Alabama, where the old Cherokee trails still wind through limestone bluffs and ancient hardwood groves that have never seen a chainsaw. I wasn't supposed to be alone out there. My girlfriend Emma had planned this weekend backpacking trip for months, researching the most isolated sections of the Sipsey Wilderness, but she'd gotten food poisoning the night before we were supposed to leave. I should have canceled. Should have stayed home with her, watched movies, ordered takeout. Instead, I loaded my pack into my Jeep and drove the 3 hours from Birmingham to the Cranal Trailhead, convincing myself I needed this, needed to prove I could handle solitude, handle the wilderness without someone else to lean on. The ranger at the station had given me an odd look when I'd mentioned my destination, the backcountry camping area near Bee Branch Falls, accessible only by a grueling 8-mile hike through terrain that swallowed cell phone signals and GPS coordinates alike. "You sure you want to go solo?" he'd asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "Had some incidents out that way recently, that folks going missing, then turning up days later with no memory of where they'd been." I'd laughed it off, attributed it to typical backwoods superstition. Now, 3 days later, sitting in my tent as something that definitely wasn't Emma called my name from the darkness beyond my campfire's dying light, I wished I'd listened. The first day had been perfect. September in Alabama's high country meant cooler temperatures, lower humidity, and foliage just beginning its transformation into autumn's violent reds and golds. The trail followed Bee Branch Creek for the first few miles, the sound of running water providing a constant, comforting soundtrack as I navigated boulder fields and root-tangled slopes. My pack felt good on my shoulders, properly balanced, and my legs found their rhythm quickly despite being out of practice. I'd made camp just as the sun disappeared behind the ridgeline in a small clearing beside a natural pool where Bee Branch widened and deepened. The water ran crystal clear over limestone shelves, cold enough to shock when I'd dipped my hand to fill my filter bottle. I'd set up my tent on level ground about 30 feet back from the water, built a proper fire ring with stones I'd gathered from the creek bed, and cooked a simple dinner of dehydrated chili and instant rice. As darkness settled around my small circle of firelight, the forest had come alive with sound. Owls hooted from the canopy overhead, their calls echoing off the limestone bluffs that rose like ancient walls on either side of the hollow. Something large, probably a deer, crashed through undergrowth in the distance. The creek murmured and gurgled over its rocky bed, a sound that should have been soothing, but somehow wasn't. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from the hike and lulled by what I thought was the peaceful isolation I'd been seeking. But sleep hadn't come easily. Every time I'd started to drift off, some new sound would jerk me back to consciousness. Branches scraping against each other in wind that didn't exist, footsteps that stopped the moment I held my breath to listen, and once, around 2 in the morning, what sounded distinctly like someone crying in the distance. When I'd finally managed to fall asleep, my dreams had been strange and fragmented. I was walking through a forest that looked like the one around me but felt wrong somehow. Too dark, too quiet, with trees that bent and twisted in impossible ways. And there was someone with me, walking just at the edge of my vision, always there when I wasn't looking directly but gone when I turned my head. I'd woken to gray dawn light filtering through my tent walls and the unsettling realization that my campfire, which I'd banked carefully before retiring, was completely cold. Not just burned down to coals, but cold as if it had been extinguished for hours. The stones of my fire ring were scattered, some of them 20 feet away from where I'd placed them. That should have been my first warning. Day 2 started with equipment problems. My GPS unit, which had worked perfectly the day before, showed my location as a blank void on its screen. The compass spun lazily, unable to find magnetic north. My phone, predictably, had no signal. But more disturbing was the fact that its internal clock seemed to be running backward. Every time I checked it, it showed an earlier time than the last reading. I told myself it was just technology acting up in a place with heavy mineral deposits. The Bankhead was known for its limestone caves and underground streams that could wreak havoc on electronic devices. But as I'd broken camp and continued deeper into the wilderness, following what should have been a well-marked trail, I'd begun to notice other troubling details. The blazes on the trees, the painted marks that indicated the official trail, were wrong. Instead of the familiar white rectangles I expected, they were deep red, almost black, and seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The trail itself felt different under my boots, sometimes solid and well-packed, other times soft and spongy, as if I were walking on something that had been recently disturbed. And then there were the trees. Ancient oaks and hickories that should have shown their age in gnarled bark and massive trunks appeared to be breathing, not swaying in the wind. There was no wind in that deep hollow, but expanding and contracting rhythmically, as if the forest itself had developed lungs. When I'd stopped to examine one more closely, pressing my palm against its bark, I could have sworn I felt a pulse beneath my hand. By afternoon, I'd reached what my map indicated should be the Bee Branch Falls camping area, but there were no falls to be found. The creek simply ended at a wall of limestone that rose straight up into the canopy, its surface smooth and featureless except for what looked like carved symbols, spirals and intersecting lines that hurt to look at directly, as if they were moving even when I knew they weren't. I'd made camp anyway, partly because I was exhausted and partly because I was no longer entirely certain I could find my way back to the trailhead. The symbols on the rock face seemed to be growing more numerous as the day wore on, spreading across the limestone like some kind of infection. And there was a smell in the air now, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in standing water. As I'd set up my tent in the same configuration as the night before, 30 feet back from the water, fire ring built from creek stones, I'd noticed something that made my stomach clench with unease. There were already stones arranged in a perfect circle exactly where I'd planned to build my fire. Not just any stones, but the exact same stones I'd used the previous night arranged in the exact same pattern. Impossible, of course. I was miles from my previous campsite, and I'd scattered those stones myself when I'd broken camp that morning. But there they were, and when I'd knelt to examine them more closely, I could see the soot stains from the fire I'd built the night before. That's when I'd started to understand that something was very, very wrong. The sun set faster than it should have, dropping behind the western ridge while my watch still showed mid-afternoon. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part was that as darkness fell, I could hear voices. At first, just a murmur, like conversation from far away. I told myself it was other backpackers, maybe camped somewhere nearby, their voices carrying farther than expected in the still air. But as I'd strained to listen, I'd realized the voices weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking any language I recognized, but somehow I understood what they were saying. They were talking about me. "He's alone," one voice had whispered from somewhere in the trees to my left. "Perfect, we can take him tonight." "No," another had replied, this one from my right, closer than the first. "Let him ripen a little longer. Fear makes them taste better." I'd built up my fire as high as I dared, using almost half my remaining firewood in a desperate attempt to create a barrier of light between myself and whatever was out there in the darkness. The flames had danced and flickered normally at first, but as the night deepened, they'd begun to change color, from yellow to green to a deep, bloody red that cast everything in hellish shadows. And then, around midnight, Emma had called my name. I'd known it wasn't really her, of course. Emma was 3 hours away in Birmingham, probably asleep in our bed with a bucket beside her in case the food poisoning came back. But the voice that drifted out of the darkness was hers exactly. The slight southern accent she'd never quite lost. The way she drew out vowels when she was happy or excited. "Michael," she'd called from somewhere beyond the fire's light. "Michael, honey, where are you? I came to surprise you." My rational mind had screamed warnings, but my heart had lurched with desperate hope. Maybe she'd felt better. Maybe she'd driven up to surprise me. Hiked in during the day while I was moving deeper into the wilderness. Maybe. "I'm hurt, Michael," the voice had continued, and now I could hear pain in it. Fear. "Something happened on the trail. I fell. I think my ankle's broken. Please, I need help." I'd grabbed my flashlight and stood, every instinct telling me to run toward that familiar voice, to help the woman I loved. But as I'd taken a step toward the darkness, the light of my flashlight had revealed something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Footprints in the soft earth beside my tent, but not human footprints. Something with too many toes, each one ending in what looked like a claw. And they were fresh, the edges still crisp, leading in a circle around my campsite. "Michael?" Emma's voice had called again, but now it was coming from a different direction, and there was something wrong with it. The accent was too thick, the pronunciation just slightly off, as if something that had never been human was trying to imitate speech it had only heard from a distance. I'd slowly backed toward my tent, keeping the fire between myself and the source of the voice, my flashlight beam sweeping back and forth across the tree line. That's when I'd seen them. Pairs of eyes reflecting the light back at me. Far too many pairs, arranged in a rough circle around my camp. Not animal eyes, which would have been unsettling enough, but something else. Something that seemed to hold intelligence and malice and a terrible kind of hunger. "Don't be afraid," the thing wearing Emma's voice had whispered, and now it was close enough that I could hear it breathing. Wet, rasping breaths that came too fast and too shallow. "I just want to hold you. I missed you so much." That's when I'd retreated into my tent, zipped it closed, and sat with my back against the far wall, clutching my knife in one hand and my flashlight in the other, listening to Emma's voice circle my campsite for the rest of the night, sometimes pleading, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing in a way that made my teeth ache. Dawn had brought silence and what I'd hoped was safety, but when I'd finally worked up the courage to emerge from my tent, I'd found new horrors waiting for me. My backpack was gone. Not stolen. Gone as if it had never existed. But all of its contents were arranged in a neat line leading away from my campsite and into the forest. My food, my extra clothes, my water purification tablets, my first aid kit. Each item placed exactly 10 feet from the next, creating a trail that disappeared into the dense undergrowth. And there was something else. Something that made my hands shake as I tried to process what I was seeing. A second tent, identical to mine, set up exactly where mine had been the previous night. But when I'd approached it and looked inside, I'd found myself staring back. Not a reflection. Another me, lying in a sleeping bag identical to mine, eyes open and staring at the ceiling, mouth moving soundlessly as if trying to speak. I'd stumbled backward, nearly falling into the cold remains of my fire, and when I'd looked again, the second tent was gone. But I could still feel those other eyes watching me. My own eyes, filled with an expression of such profound terror that I'd had to look away. That was yesterday. Or maybe it was a week ago. Time had become fluid in this place, unreliable. My watch showed different times every time I looked at it, sometimes running backward, sometimes stopping altogether. The sun seemed to rise and set according to no schedule I understood, and I'd lost count of how many times I'd tried to sleep, only to wake and find that no time had passed at all. I'd attempted to leave, of course, had packed up what remained of my gear and started hiking back the way I'd come, following the red blazes that were now definitely moving when I wasn't looking directly at them, shifting position on the trees like living things. But no matter which direction I walked, I always ended up back at the same campsite, beside the same limestone wall with its growing collection of impossible symbols. And the voices had multiplied. Emma was still there, still calling my name, still pleading for help with injuries that made her voice wet and thick. But now she was joined by others. My mother, who'd been dead for 5 years, telling me she missed me and asking why I'd never visited her grave. My college roommate, Jake, laughing about some shared joke I couldn't quite remember. My boss for my first job asking why I'd never finished that report. All of them just outside the circle of my firelight, all of them wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate but felt in my bones. And then, on what I thought was the 3rd night but might have been the 10th, they'd started to show themselves. Emma had been the first. She'd stepped into the light of my fire wearing the same hiking clothes she'd packed for this trip. Her blonde hair pulled back in the same ponytail, her face exactly as I remembered it. But when she'd smiled at me, her teeth were too numerous and too sharp, and when she'd reached out her hand, I could see that her fingers were too long and bent at impossible angles. "I found you," she'd said in her perfect imitation of Emma's voice. "I've been looking everywhere. Come with me, Michael. Let's go home." I'd closed my eyes, pressed my palms against my ears, told myself it wasn't real. But when I'd opened them again, she was closer, and I could see that what I'd taken for shadow behind her was actually wrong somehow. A darkness that moved independently of the firelight. That seemed to have depth and weight. "I love you," she'd whispered, and her voice had been exactly right, exactly Emma's voice saying the words she'd said to me 1,000 times before. "Don't you love me too?" That's when I'd seen the others. They'd emerged from the tree line like a grotesque receiving line. People I'd known, people I'd loved, people I'd forgotten, all of them wrong in different ways. My mother's neck was bent at an angle that should have been fatal. Jake's eyes were solid black, and his skin seemed to move and shift like it was full of crawling things. My boss was there, but so was my 3rd-grade teacher, my first girlfriend, the barista from the coffee shop near my apartment. All of them smiling those 2 wide smiles, all of them reaching toward me with hands that had too many joints. "We missed you," they'd said in unison, their voices creating a harmony that was beautiful and terrible. "Stay with us. Stay forever." I'd run then, finally, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for where I was going, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as I stumbled over roots and rocks. But no matter how far I ran, I could hear them behind me, calling my name, telling me they loved me, asking me not to leave them again. And when exhaustion finally forced me to stop, gasping and shaking in a small clearing I'd never seen before, I'd looked around and found myself back at my campsite, the fire still burning, the limestone wall still covered in its spreading cancer of symbols. That was when I'd understood the truth. I wasn't going to leave this place. Maybe I'd never really been here at all. Maybe I'd died in a car accident on the drive up, or had a stroke while hiking, or simply lost my mind and was now in some psychiatric facility, drooling while doctors tried to figure out what had broken inside my skull. But it felt real. The cold night air raising goosebumps on my arms felt real. The ache in my feet from days of hiking felt real. The terror that sat in my chest like a physical weight felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. So I'd made a decision. If I was trapped here, if this was my new reality, then I was going to fight it. I'd gathered every piece of wood I could find, built my fire higher than ever before, and settled in to wait for my visitors to return. They'd come, of course. They always came. Emma first, then the others, stepping into my circle of light to plead and threaten and promise. But this time, I'd been ready. "You're not Emma," I'd said when she'd appeared, and my voice had been steadier than I'd expected. "Emma is safe at home. Emma never came here." The thing wearing her face had tilted its head, and for a moment its smile had faltered. "Of course I'm Emma. Look at me, Michael. Really look." I had looked, forcing myself to see past the perfect mimicry to what lurked beneath. The proportions were just slightly wrong. Her eyes a millimeter too far apart, her mouth a fraction too wide, her movements just a beat out of sync with what they should have been. And behind her, that writhing darkness had become more visible, revealing glimpses of something vast and hungry and utterly inhuman. "What are you?" I'd asked. We are what remains, it had answered, and now its voice was a chorus of everyone I'd ever known, all speaking in perfect unison. We are what's left when the stories end and the memories fade. We are the hollow places where love used to live. What do you want? To fill the emptiness. To be real again, if only for a little while. The Emma thing had stepped closer, and I'd seen that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. We feed on connection, on the bonds between people. And you, Michael, you're so wonderfully connected. So many people have loved you, have known you, have shaped who you are. If we take you, we take all of them too. I'd raised my knife then, the blade catching the firelight, but the thing had only laughed, a sound like wind through empty houses. Iron won't help you here, it had said. This isn't that kind of story. We're not the kind of monsters that can be stabbed or shot or burned. We're the kind that live in the spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the moment of doubt when you wonder if the person you love is really the person you think they are. It had been right, of course. When I'd slashed at it with the knife, the blade had passed through without resistance, as if I were attacking shadow. But something interesting had happened. For just a moment, the Emma mask had slipped, revealing something underneath that made my eyes water to look at directly. But you're still bound by some rules, I'd said, more guess than knowledge. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to trick me. You wouldn't need to wear their faces. The thing had gone very still, and I'd known I'd hit on something important. You can't just take me, I'd continued, my mind racing. I have to give myself to you. I have to choose to go with you, to believe that you're really the people I love. Clever boy, it had whispered, and now its voice was my mother's, warm and proud the way it had been when I'd solved a difficult math problem or remembered to clean my room without being asked. But everyone breaks eventually. Everyone gets tired of fighting. Everyone wants to believe, in the end, that the people they've lost have found their way back to them. It had been right about that, too. Part of me, a large part, wanted nothing more than to step forward into those familiar arms, to pretend that death and distance and the simple passage of time could be overcome by wanting something badly enough. The loneliness I'd been carrying, the reason I'd come out here in the first place, made the lie almost irresistible. But I'd held firm, and eventually, as the first gray light of dawn had begun to filter through the canopy, the things had melted back into the forest, leaving me alone with my dying fire and my growing understanding of the trap I was in. That brings me to now, to tonight, my fourth night in this place that isn't quite a place. My fire is burning low despite the wood I've fed it, and I can hear them gathering again in the darkness beyond the light. Emma's voice calling my name with perfect love and infinite patience. The others whispering among themselves, planning their next approach. I've been thinking about what the Emma thing said, about how everyone breaks eventually. Maybe it's true. Maybe I'm already starting to break, sitting here alone while the familiar voices of everyone I've ever cared about beg me to join them in whatever they've become. But I've also been thinking about the symbols on the limestone wall, the ones that have been growing and changing since I arrived. I've been trying to understand what they mean, these spirals and intersecting lines that hurt to look at but seem to contain some kind of message. And I think I'm starting to understand. They're not symbols at all. They're instructions. A map, of sorts, showing the way between the world I came from and this hollow place where lost connections come to feed. The things wearing the faces of people I love, they didn't create this place. They're trapped here, just like I am, hungry and desperate and growing weaker as the memories that created them fade. But the symbols were carved by someone else. Someone who found this place before me and left a message for whoever came next. A warning, yes, but also a key. I figured out what I need to do. It's going to require more courage than I think I have, and there's a very good chance it will destroy me. But the alternative is to sit here until I go mad, or until I'm too tired to resist their promises of connection and love. The fire is getting low. I can see Emma at the edge of the light now, her face perfect in its mimicry of the woman I love, her arms outstretched in welcome. Behind her, the others are gathering. Everyone I've ever known, everyone I've ever lost, all of them waiting for me to take that final step forward. "Michael," Emma calls. Emma, and her voice breaks my heart with its perfect imitation of love. "Please, I'm so cold. I've been waiting for you for so long." I stand up, my legs shaky from days of poor sleep and irregular meals. The knife is heavy in my hand, useless against these things but comforting in its weight and reality. I look at the assembled crowd of familiar faces, all of them watching me with expressions of hope and hunger. "I know what you are," I tell them, and my voice echoes strangely in the hollow, as if the words are being spoken by someone else. "And I know what you need." Emma takes a step closer, her perfect smile wavering slightly. "We need you, Michael. We need the connections you carry, the love that lives inside you. Give that to us, and we can all be together forever." "No," I say, and I mean it. "That's not what you need. What you need is to let go." I turn toward the limestone wall with its growing collection of symbols, and I begin to understand what the person who carved them was trying to tell me. The spirals aren't traps. They're releases. The intersecting lines aren't boundaries. They're passages. This place exists because we can't let go of the people we love, even when they're gone. It feeds on our unwillingness to accept loss, our desperate need to believe that death is just another kind of distance that can be overcome. But the things wearing familiar faces aren't the people we remember. They're echoes, shadows, the hollow spaces left behind when someone we love disappears from our lives. And they're suffering. "You're not Emma," I say to the thing that bears her face. "Emma is alive and well and probably wondering why I haven't called to check in. You're the space she left in my heart when we had that fight 3 months ago, when I thought she might leave me. You're my fear of losing her, given form and hunger." The Emma thing's face crumples, and for a moment I see something that might be relief flicker behind its eyes. "Yes," it whispers. "I'm so tired of pretending to be someone I'm not, so tired of carrying love that isn't mine." One by one, I turn to face them all, every familiar face, every beloved voice, every connection that has become a chain. "You're all fears," I tell them. "Fears of loss, of abandonment, of being forgotten. You're the parts of me that can't accept that people change, that relationships end, that death is real and final and not something that can be negotiated with." They nod, and I see tears on faces that shouldn't be able to cry. "Let us go," my mother says in her own dear voice. "Please, Michael, let us rest." I look at the symbols on the wall one more time, and I think I understand what I need to do. The knife in my hand isn't for them. It's for me. Not to end my life, but to cut the connections that bind these echoes to the world, to sever the emotional ties that keep them trapped in this hungry, hollow place. It's going to hurt. Love always hurts when you let it go, even when you know you have to, even when holding on is causing more damage than release. I press the blade to my palm and draw it across, watching my blood well up and drop onto the stone floor of the hollow. Where each drop lands, the symbols glow with soft, warm light, and I feel something inside me break free. A knot of anxiety I've been carrying about Emma, about whether she really loves me, about whether I'm worthy of love at all. The Emma thing smiles, and this time the expression is genuine and peaceful. "Thank you," she says. And then she's gone. Not fading, but simply no longer there, as if she'd never existed at all. One by one, I let them go. My mother, not my actual mother, but my guilt over not being there when she died. Jake, not my friend, but my regret over losing touch with him after college. Each cut on my palm, each drop of blood on the stone, each conscious choice to release a fear that has been masquerading as love. It hurts more than I expected, this voluntary severing of connections. But it also feels like liberation. like taking off a pack I've been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. When the last echo disappears, my boss, who had never been my boss at all but my fear of professional failure wearing his familiar face, I find myself alone in the hollow for the first time since I arrived. The silence is profound, but it's not empty. It's the silence of completion, of work finished, of rest earned. The symbols on the limestone wall are glowing now, all of them, creating a pattern of light that shows me exactly what I need to do. There's a way out, but it's not back the way I came. It's forward, through the stone itself, through a passage that exists only when someone has paid the price to open it. I gather what few possessions I have left and step toward the wall. Where the light is brightest, the stone becomes permeable, like walking through water. On the other side, I find myself standing on a familiar trail, the real trail, with genuine white blazes and GPS coordinates that make sense. My phone has a signal again, and when I check the time, I discover that only 6 hours have passed since I left the trailhead. Not days, hours. Whatever happened in that hollow place, it existed in the spaces between seconds, in the pause between heartbeats. I hike out quickly, almost running, afraid that if I look back I might see the entrance to that place still open, still waiting for the next person who carries too much love and not enough wisdom about when to let go. The ranger at the station gives me the same odd look when I return my backcountry permit, and I understand now why he was concerned. "Everything go okay?" he asks. "Yes," I tell him, and it's the truth. "But I think someone should put up warning signs on that trail. People might get lost back there." He nods seriously. "We've been thinking about that. Got reports of folks seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices in the woods. You experience anything like that?" I consider telling him the truth, but I know how it would sound. Instead, I just shake my head and head for my Jeep. On the drive home, I call Emma. She answers on the second ring, her voice bright and healthy, all traces of food poisoning gone. "How's the wilderness treating you?" she asks. "It taught me something important," I tell her, "about letting go when you need to, and holding on to what's real." That sounds very philosophical for someone who's been alone in the woods for 6 hours. Yeah, I agree. I guess some lessons don't take very long to learn. When I get home, Emma is waiting for me with takeout Chinese food and a movie queued up on the TV. As we settle onto the couch together, her warm and solid presence beside me, I think about the hollow place and the things that wore familiar faces. They're at rest now, I hope. The fears and guilts and regrets that had been masquerading as love, that had been feeding on connection while slowly poisoning it. And I'm free of them. Finally able to love the real Emma sitting beside me without the shadow of my terror of losing her. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and Emma is sleeping peacefully beside me, I hear something calling my name from very far away. Not Emma's voice this time, and not my mother's, or Jake's, or anyone else I've known. It's my own voice, calling from some hollow place I haven't found yet, some fear I haven't faced, some connection I haven't learned to release. And I know that someday, when I'm strong enough and wise enough and brave enough, I'll have to answer that call too. The wilderness is patient. It can wait. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Cheaha Mountain in the Talladega National Forest, Alabama, during what was supposed to be a simple 3-day hiking trip with my closest friends from college. The group consisted of myself, Sarah Rodriguez, my best friend since freshman year and an experienced backpacker who'd convinced us all to make this trip, Michael Williams, my ex-boyfriend who somehow managed to stay part of our friend group despite our messy breakup 2 years ago, and Lisa Gonzalez, Sarah's younger sister who'd just graduated and wanted to celebrate with an adventure before starting her corporate job in Birmingham. We'd chosen the Pinhoti Trail section that winds through the Cheaha Wilderness specifically because Sarah had hiked parts of it before and promised us stunning views from Alabama's highest peak. The plan was straightforward. Drive down from Nashville on Friday afternoon, set up camp at one of the backcountry sites, spend Saturday hiking to the summit, and return home Sunday evening. None of us expected the forest to have other plans. The drive down had been typical for our group, Michael playing his terrible classic rock playlist too loud, Lisa nervously checking her phone every 5 minutes until we lost signal, and Sarah studying topographic maps like she was planning a military operation. I found myself stealing glances at Michael in the rearview mirror, remembering why I'd fallen for him in the first place, and simultaneously remembering why I'd had to end things. He had this way of making everything seem like an adventure, even grocery shopping, but he also had a tendency to disappear when things got serious. Not physically disappear, emotionally. It was like watching someone slowly fade away while standing right in front of you. We reached the Cheaha trailhead around 4 p.m. on Friday, the late October sun already casting long shadows through the hardwood forest. The leaves were spectacular. Brilliant oranges and deep crimsons that seemed to glow in the fading light, but there was something else in the air that afternoon. A stillness that felt too complete, too deliberate. Even the usual forest sounds seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. "God, it's quiet out here," Lisa commented as we shouldered our packs. She was the least experienced hiker among us, having agreed to come more out of FOMO than actual interest in wilderness camping. Her brand new REI gear still had tags on some pieces, and she kept adjusting her pack straps every few minutes. "That's the point," Sarah replied, but I noticed she was looking around with an expression I'd never seen before. Sarah was the type who could navigate by stars and identify bird calls from 50 yards away. If something in the forest was making her uneasy, that was worth paying attention to. We hiked about 2 miles into the wilderness before finding our planned campsite, a small clearing near Cheaha Creek, surrounded by towering oaks and hickories. The creek should have been babbling over rocks, but it was running slower than expected for October, the water dark and strangely warm when I dipped my fingers in to test it. Michael immediately started gathering firewood with his usual enthusiasm, disappearing into the tree line while the rest of us set up our tents. That was typical Michael. Jump into action first, think later. Sarah and I had gotten pretty efficient at camp setup over the years, our movement synchronized from countless weekend trips. Lisa tried to help, but mostly got in the way, her nervousness manifesting in constant chatter about whether we'd properly hung our food bags and whether that rustling sound was a bear. "There aren't many black bears in this part of the forest," Sarah assured her, but even as she said it, she was scanning the darkening woods with more intensity than usual. "The populations are mostly further north, in the Cherokee National Forest." By the time Michael returned with an armload of dead branches, full darkness had settled over our campsite like a heavy blanket. The forest sounds that had been muted during the day were now completely absent. No owl calls, no rustling of small mammals, no insect chorus, just an oppressive silence that seemed to press against our eardrums. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" I asked as Michael built our fire. The flames caught quickly, too quickly actually, leaping higher than they should have from such a small pile of kindling. The light danced strangely, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames themselves. "Probably just the weather," Michael said, but his voice had lost its usual confident tone. "Sometimes atmospheric pressure can affect animal behavior." Sarah was studying her GPS device with a frown. "That's weird. I'm showing our location as about half a mile north of where we should be." She held up the device, angling it toward the firelight. "According to this, we're not even near Cheaha Creek." "GPS can be screwy in heavy forest cover," I said, though I knew Sarah was too experienced to make that kind of basic error. She'd been using GPS devices since before they became standard phone features. We cooked a simple dinner of instant pasta and canned sauce, the conversation gradually becoming more forced as the evening wore on. Every few minutes, one of us would pause mid-sentence, listening to the absolute silence surrounding our small circle of firelight. It was the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the sound of blood moving through your ears. Lisa kept glancing toward the tree line, her new headlamp beam sweeping back and forth across the darkness. "Do you think there might be other people out here? Like, not hikers, other people?" "What do you mean, other people?" Sarah asked, though her hand had moved instinctively to the bear spray clipped to her belt. "I don't know. Just people who might not want us here." Michael laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Come on, Lise. This is Cheaha, not Deliverance Country. The worst thing we might run into is some weekend warriors from Birmingham who forgot to pack a can opener." But I knew what Lisa meant. There was something about the silence that felt deliberate, as if we were being watched, evaluated. I'd spent enough time in forest to know the difference between natural quiet and the artificial hush that falls when predators are nearby. This felt like the latter, but magnified beyond anything I'd ever experienced. We banked the fire early and retreated to our tents around 10 p.m. Sarah and Lisa shared a two-person tent on one side of the clearing, while Michael had set up his solo tent about 15 feet away. My own tent was positioned roughly between them, forming a loose triangle around the fire pit. I lay in my sleeping bag for what felt like hours, listening to nothing. Not just the absence of sound, but something that felt actively silent, as if the darkness itself was absorbing any noise we might make. Even our breathing seemed muffled, dampened by some invisible presence that pressed down on the campsite like a physical weight. Sometime around midnight, I was jerked awake by a sound that shouldn't have been there, the soft whisper of a zipper being drawn slowly upward. My tent zipper, from the outside. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs as the zipper continued its deliberate journey from bottom to top. The movement was careful, controlled, almost gentle. Not the hasty fumbling of someone trying to break in, but the patient precision of someone who had all the time in the world. When the zipper reached the top, my tent flap fell open, revealing nothing but darkness. No figure silhouetted against the stars, no shape blocking the faint glow of our banked fire. Just an opening where my closed tent should be, and a rectangle of black so complete it seemed to absorb light rather than simply lack it. I wanted to scream, to call out to Sarah and Michael, but my throat had closed completely. The darkness in my tent opening wasn't just the absence of light, it was something else. Something that made my primitive brain recoil in recognition of a threat so fundamental that my conscious mind couldn't even process it. Then, from somewhere that might have been inches from my face or might have been miles away, came a voice. Jennifer. My own name, spoken in a whisper that carried no emotion, no inflection, no humanity. Just the flat recognition of my identity, like a computer reading data from a file. I squeezed my eyes shut and counted to 10, the way my therapist had taught me to handle panic attacks. When I opened them again, my tent was properly zipped, the fabric walls intact and secure around me. No opening, no darkness, no whispered voice, but my sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, spread open as if I'd been getting ready to climb out. I had no memory of unzipping it. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright in my tent, clutching my headlamp and jumping at every small sound, which, given the continued silence, meant jumping at nothing at all. By dawn, I'd convinced myself that I'd experienced some kind of waking dream, the result of stress and unfamiliar surroundings and too much caffeine during the drive down. Morning brought no relief from the oppressive quiet, but it did bring a discovery that made my stomach turn cold. Lisa was gone. Her side of the tent was empty, her sleeping bag unzipped from the inside just like mine had been. Her hiking boots were missing, but all her other gear remained perfectly arranged. Backpack, water bottles, extra clothes, even her phone, which showed 17 missed calls from her mother between midnight and 3 a.m. She probably just went to the bathroom, Michael said, but his voice was tight with the same dread I was feeling. You know how she is about privacy. Sarah was already checking the perimeter of our campsite, her movements quick and efficient. "Her tracks head toward the creek," she called back. "But they stop at the water's edge. No prints on the other side, no indication she crossed." We followed Lisa's trail to Cheaha Creek, which was running even lower than it had been the day before. The water was now barely 6 inches deep, so clear we could see every pebble on the bottom. Sarah was right. Lisa's boot prints led straight to the edge and simply ended, as if she'd walked into the water and dissolved. "People don't just vanish," Michael said, but he was staring at the creek with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Pure, unfiltered fear. We spent the morning searching systematically, calling Lisa's name until our voices were hoarse. The forest swallowed our shouts without even an echo, absorbing sound the way thick carpet absorbs footsteps. After 4 hours of fruitless searching, we decided to hike back to the trailhead and contact park rangers. That's when we discovered our second problem. According to Sarah's GPS, we were now 3 miles northeast of where we'd camped, in a section of forest that didn't appear on any of our maps. The device showed our location as a blank area, completely unmarked and unnamed. When Sarah tried to navigate back to our starting point, the GPS screen flickered and went dark. "The battery was fully charged last night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She tried turning the device back on, but got nothing. Dead electronics in the middle of nowhere, with one of our group already missing. Michael's phone was also dead, despite showing 80% battery when we'd turned in. Mine had somehow lost all signal and was displaying the wrong time, 3:17 a.m., even though the sun was clearly overhead. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We follow the creek downstream. All water in this area eventually leads to Cheaha Lake. From there, we can find the main trail." But after 2 hours of hiking alongside the creek, we realized we were moving in a circle. Somehow, despite following what should have been a straight line of flowing water, we kept arriving back at our campsite. The same fire ring, the same arrangement of stones Sarah had built, the same torn piece of my camp towel that had caught on a tree branch. "This isn't possible," Michael said, but the evidence was right in front of us. 3 times we'd followed the creek downstream, and 3 times we'd ended up back where we started. By afternoon, the impossible had become routine. Sarah tried leading us away from the creek entirely, using traditional navigation techniques, following ridge lines, noting the position of the sun, marking our path with broken branches. But every route led back to the campsite, as if the forest itself was herding us back to this one specific location. The discovery of Lisa's backpack finally shattered our remaining composure. Sarah found it hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground, positioned directly over our fire pit. The pack was unzipped and empty except for a single item, Lisa's college graduation photo, the one where she's throwing her cap in the air with the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face. But the photo had been altered. Lisa's face was still smiling, but her eyes had been carefully scratched out with something sharp, leaving tiny shreds of photo paper curled around 2 empty holes. "Someone's fucking with us," Michael said, but his voice cracked on the last word. He was trying to maintain his usual bravado, but I could see his hands shaking. "This is some kind of sick joke. Local assholes screwing with campers." Sarah said nothing. She was staring at the photo with an expression that made my skin crawl. Not fear, exactly, but recognition. Like she was seeing something that confirmed a suspicion she'd been harboring. "Sarah," I asked, "what is it?" She looked up at me with eyes that seemed much older than they had the day before. "My grandmother used to tell stories about places like this, places where the forest doesn't let you leave." "Your grandmother was a sweet old lady who believed in fairy tales," Michael snapped. "This is reality. Someone took Lisa, and now they're trying to scare us into making mistakes." But even as he spoke, Michael was backing away from the tree, putting distance between himself and Lisa's suspended backpack. His rational explanations were crumbling under the weight of accumulated impossibilities. We spent that second night huddled around our fire, taking turns keeping watch. The silence had become so complete that we could hear each other's heartbeats. the soft whisper of fabric against fabric when we shifted position, the tiny snap and pop of sap bubbling in the burning wood. Around 2 a.m., during my watch, the fire began to change color. The flames gradually shifted from orange to deep blue, then to a sickly green that cast strange shadows and made our faces look corpse-like. The wood wasn't burning any differently. Same small flames, same amount of heat. But the color was wrong in a way that made my vision blur and my stomach lurch. I was about to wake the others when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling our campsite, staying just beyond the ring of green firelight. The footsteps had an odd rhythm. Step, step, pause, step, step, pause, like someone walking with a severe limp or dragging one foot behind them. "Lisa," I called softly, though every instinct I had was screaming that whatever was out there wasn't Lisa. The footsteps stopped. Then, from the darkness beyond our fire came Lisa's voice. "Jenny, is that you?" But the voice was wrong. Too flat, too emotionless, like someone reading words from a script without understanding their meaning. And there was something else. A wet, gurgling undertone, as if Lisa was speaking through a mouthful of water. "Lisa, where have you been?" I asked, my hand already reaching to shake Sarah awake. "We've been looking for you." "I went to get water," the voice replied. "From the creek. The water is so warm here. So warm and thick." Sarah's eyes snapped open at the sound of Lisa's voice, but instead of relief, her expression showed pure horror. She grabbed my arm and squeezed hard enough to leave bruises. "That's not Lisa," she whispered so quietly I could barely hear her. The thing in the darkness that sounded like Lisa began to laugh, a sound like branches breaking, like metal scraping against stone. The laughter went on and on, building in volume until it seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the trees themselves, from the ground beneath us, from inside our own heads. Michael woke with a start and immediately began scrambling for his pack. "We're leaving. Right now. I don't care if we have to walk all night." But as he stood up, the laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by Lisa's voice again. "Don't go, Michael. I have something to show you. Something wonderful." From the edge of our firelight, a figure emerged. It was Lisa, but wrong in every conceivable way. She was naked, her skin pale and gleaming with moisture that reflected the green firelight like scales. Her hair hung in wet tangles around her face, and when she smiled at us, her teeth were too sharp, too numerous, crowding her mouth like broken glass. But it was her eyes that made me scream. Where Lisa's warm brown eyes should have been, there were only holes. Not empty sockets, but openings that seemed to go down and down, deeper than her skull could possibly contain. Through those holes, I could see something moving, something that writhed and coiled in the darkness behind her face. "I found the source," Not Lisa said, her voice still maintaining that horrible flat tone. "The place where the water comes from. Do you want to see? Do you want a drink?" Sarah was on her feet now, bear spray in her hand, but her arm was shaking so badly she could barely aim it. "You're not Lisa," she said, her voice barely audible. The thing wearing Lisa's face tilted its head to one side, the movement too quick, too bird-like for human anatomy. "Of course I'm Lisa. Look at me, Sarah. Don't you recognize your own sister?" Michael had grabbed a burning branch from the fire and was holding it like a weapon. The green flames danced along the wood, casting writhing shadows that seemed to move independently. "What did you do with her? Where is Lisa?" Not Lisa's smile widened, stretching her face in ways that human facial muscles shouldn't allow. "Lisa is right here. Lisa is everywhere now. Lisa is in the water, in the trees, in the spaces between your thoughts. Lisa is finally free." The thing that looked like Lisa began to walk toward us, its movements wrong, too fluid, like it was floating just above the ground rather than walking on it. As it approached our fire, I could see that the moisture covering its skin wasn't water at all, but something thicker, darker, that moved and pulsed with its own rhythm. "Run," Sarah whispered. We ran. Crashing through the underbrush in the dark, branches tearing at our clothes and faces, we fled deeper into the forest. Behind us, the thing that had been Lisa was laughing again, but now the sound was coming from multiple directions, as if there were dozens of not Lisas surrounding us in the darkness. Michael's improvised torch had gone out within the first minute of our panicked flight, leaving us stumbling blind through trees and undergrowth. I kept expecting to trip, to fall, to slam face first into a tree trunk, but somehow we kept moving, kept running, driven by pure terror and the sound of that inhuman laughter echoing through the forest. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we collapsed in a small clearing, gasping and bleeding from dozens of small cuts. Sarah's bear spray was gone, lost somewhere in our flight. Michael had torn his shirt completely off on a thorny bush, and my left ankle was throbbing from a twisted step on uneven ground. "We have to get out of here," I panted. "We have to find the main trail." "There is no main trail," Sarah said, her voice hollow with despair. "Don't you get it? We're not in the same forest anymore. This isn't Cheaha. This isn't anywhere." Michael was looking around the clearing with wild eyes. "There has to be an explanation. People don't just disappear. Forests don't change. GPS devices don't lie." "Tell that to Lisa," I said. As if summoned by her name, Lisa's voice drifted through the trees around us. "Where are you going? I want to show you the water. I want to show you how warm it is." The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere, sometimes seeming to originate from inside our own heads. Not Lisa was following us, tracking us through the darkness with senses that didn't require light or sound. "I have an idea," Sarah whispered. "My grandmother used to say that places like this, they have rules, patterns. If we can figure out the pattern, maybe we can break it." "What kind of pattern?" I asked, though I was barely listening. I was too focused on the sound of footsteps. Multiple sets now, moving through the forest around our clearing. Step, step, pause. Step, step, pause. The same rhythm we'd heard before, but multiplied, as if an entire army of not Lisas was surrounding us. "The creek," Sarah said urgently. "Every time we followed it, we ended up back at camp. But what if we're supposed to go upstream? What if the source is the way out?" "The source of what?" Michael asked. Before Sarah could answer, not Lisa emerged from the tree line on the far side of our clearing. But this time, she wasn't alone. There were 3 of them now, all identical copies of Lisa, all naked and gleaming with that strange moisture, all wearing the same empty eye sockets and too wide smile. They moved in perfect synchronization, their heads tilted at exactly the same angle, their arms swaying in unison. "We found more water," they said in chorus, their voices creating a harmonic that made my teeth ache. "So much water, so warm and thick and old. Do you want to drink? Do you want to join us?" The 3 not Lisas began to walk toward us, and as they moved, I could see that they weren't quite walking on the ground. Their feet hovered maybe an inch above the forest floor, leaving no prints, making no sound except for that rhythmic step, step, pause. "The creek," Sarah hissed. "We follow it upstream. Now." We bolted again, but this time with purpose. Sarah led us through the darkness toward the sound of flowing water. Water that seemed much louder now, more urgent. Behind us, the chorus of not Lisas was laughing, but they didn't seem to be following. Instead, their laughter grew fainter, more distant, as if they were content to let us go. We found Cheaha Creek, but it was different now. The water was running faster, deeper, and when I knelt to touch it, the liquid was warm against my fingers. Not just warm, hot, almost scalding, and thick with a consistency more like syrup than water. "This isn't right," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. Nothing had been right for the past 2 days. We'd moved beyond the realm of right and wrong into something else entirely. Sarah was already following the creek upstream, using her hands to feel her way along the bank in the darkness. "Come on, we follow this to wherever it starts." The creek led us up a steep slope, through stands of trees that felt older and more twisted than the forest we'd started in. The water beside us was getting progressively hotter and thicker, until it was more like a stream of warm molasses than anything that should exist in nature. After climbing for what felt like hours, we reached the source. It was a pool, maybe 20 feet across, fed by a spring that bubbled up from deep underground. But the water wasn't water at all. It was some kind of dark, viscous liquid that moved with its own current, swirling and eddying in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And floating in the center of the pool was Lisa. The real Lisa, not the things that had been wearing her face. She was unconscious but breathing, her body rising and falling gently with the motion of the liquid. Her skin had taken on a pale, translucent quality, as if she was slowly dissolving into whatever filled the pool. "Lisa!" Michael shouted, and before Sarah or I could stop him, he was wading into the pool. The liquid came up to his waist, and immediately I could see the same translucent quality beginning to spread across his skin. But he reached Lisa and grabbed her under the arms, pulling her toward the edge of the pool. "Help me!" he yelled, and Sarah and I each grabbed one of Lisa's arms, hauling her out of the viscous liquid and onto solid ground. Lisa's eyes fluttered open, but they were her own eyes now, brown and confused and very much human. "Jenny, what happened? I was getting water from the creek and then—" "Don't talk," I said. "We need to get out of here." But as I spoke, I realized that the forest around us was changing. The trees were becoming less distinct, their edges blurring like watercolors in rain. The ground beneath our feet was softening, becoming spongy and uncertain. "The pool," Sarah said urgently. "It's the anchor, the thing that keeps this place stable. We disrupted it." She was right. With Lisa removed from the pool, whatever force had been maintaining this pocket of twisted reality was breaking down. The forest was dissolving around us, revealing glimpses of something else beneath, flashes of normal trees, ordinary daylight, the sound of traffic in the distance. But the dissolution was spreading to us as well. I looked down at my hands and saw that my fingers were becoming translucent, like Lisa's skin had been in the pool. Michael was fading too, his outline becoming less solid with each passing second. "We have to choose," Sarah said, her voice already sounding distant and hollow. "We can stay here and dissolve with everything else, or we can jump back into the pool and hope it takes us somewhere real." Lisa was barely conscious, her body limp in my arms. Michael was staring at his disappearing hands with a look of absolute terror. The forest around us was now more absence than presence, a sketch of trees drawn in fading pencil. I made the decision for all of us. "Together," I said, and we jumped. The liquid was shockingly cold this time, not the warm syrup it had been before. It felt like ordinary water, Cheaha Creek, flowing clear and clean over smooth stones. We surfaced, gasping and choking, our feet finding purchase on a rocky creek bottom. Sunlight was filtering through normal trees. A blue jay was calling somewhere upstream. In the distance, I could hear the sound of other hikers, their voices carried on a breeze that smelled of autumn leaves and wood smoke. We had found our way back. Lisa was conscious now, confused but coherent. Michael was solid again, his skin its normal color and texture. Sarah's GPS device chirped back to life, showing our location as exactly where it should be, Cheaha Creek, half a mile from the main trail. We hiked out in silence, none of us willing to talk about what we'd experienced until we were safely back at our cars. Even then, our conversation was halting, uncertain. How do you process something that shouldn't have been possible? Lisa remembered nothing after leaving her tent to find a bathroom. Michael insisted the whole thing had been some kind of shared hallucination, possibly caused by contaminated water or spores from some exotic fungus. Sarah said nothing at all until we were almost back to Nashville. "My grandmother always said that some places remember things," she finally told me as we drove through the growing darkness. "Old things, things that happened before people came here. She said those places can call to certain people, show them glimpses of what was here before." "You think that's what happened to us?" I asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I think we went somewhere that Lisa wasn't supposed to come back from, and I think we're lucky that we did." I never went camping again after that weekend. None of us did. Lisa moved to Portland 6 months later, claiming she needed a change of scenery. Michael started seeing a therapist and eventually moved back to his hometown in Ohio. Sarah took up rock climbing instead of hiking. She said she preferred activities where she could see exactly where she was going. As for me, I still dream about that pool sometimes. The dark liquid swirling in patterns that shouldn't exist, and Lisa floating in the center like some kind of offering. In my dreams, I can hear her voice calling from the water. "Jenny, come back. Come see how warm it is." But what haunts me most isn't the supernatural horror we encountered in that twisted forest. It's the realization that came to me weeks later when I was trying to make sense of our experience. The things wearing Lisa's face had known our names. They had known details about our relationships, our fears, our histories together. They had spoken with Lisa's voice, moved with approximations of her mannerisms, which means that somewhere in that dark pool, something had been learning from her, studying her, preparing to become her. And sometimes late at night I wonder if the Lisa we brought back was really Lisa at all, or if something else learned to wear her face so perfectly that even we couldn't tell the difference. The Lisa I know now laughs at all the same jokes, remembers all the same stories, carries all the same scars from childhood accidents. But there's something in her eyes sometimes. A depth that wasn't there before, like looking into water that goes down and down with no bottom in sight. And when she smiles, just for a moment, her teeth look a little too sharp. I tell myself it's my imagination, trauma from those 2 days in the forest that my mind couldn't process properly. I tell myself that Lisa is Lisa, that we all made it out safely, that the horror ended when we jumped back into that pool. But I've stopped returning her calls, and I've started having dreams about warm, thick water and voices calling my name from places where no voices should be, because sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I can still hear them laughing. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Bankhead National Forest, deep in the heart of Alabama's most remote wilderness, where the ancient hills hold secrets that should never be disturbed. I should have listened to my instincts when Marcus first suggested the trip. My boyfriend of 3 years had been acting strange for weeks, distant, preoccupied, muttering about getting away from it all and finding himself in nature. When he proposed a weekend camping trip to celebrate our anniversary, something in his eyes made my skin crawl, but I dismissed it as work stress. Marcus worked as an insurance adjuster, dealing with fraudulent claims day after day. The job was eating at him, he said. He needed to disconnect. "Just you and me, Jenny," he'd whispered, his breath hot against my ear as we planned the trip, like the old days, before everything got so complicated. I didn't know what he meant by complicated, but I agreed. Our relationship had been strained lately. Arguments over small things, long silences, the way he'd stare at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. A weekend in nature seemed like exactly what we needed. We drove north from Birmingham on a Friday afternoon in late October, the autumn air crisp with the promise of winter. Marcus had chosen a remote section of the Bankhead National Forest, near the ruins of an old settlement called Corley's Mill. According to his research, the area had been abandoned in the 1920s after a series of unexplained disappearances. The locals called it cursed ground, but Marcus laughed off the superstitions. "Just stories to keep tourists away," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Perfect for privacy." The word privacy sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. We parked at a forgotten trailhead marked only by a rusted Forest Service sign, its paint so faded I could barely make out the warning about staying on marked trails. Marcus shouldered his oversized backpack, much larger than what we'd need for 2 nights, and headed into the woods without waiting for me. The forest was wrong from the beginning, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The trees grew too close together, their branches interlocking overhead to block out most of the late afternoon sun. Spanish moss hung in sickly gray curtains, and the air smelled of decay and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. "Marcus, wait up," I called, but he was already disappearing around a bend in the trail, moving with a purpose that seemed at odds with our casual camping plans. I hurried to catch up, my hiking boots squelching in the soggy earth. The trail was poorly maintained, overgrown with thorny vines that caught at my clothes and seemed to move even when there was no wind. My phone showed no signal, not surprising in this remote area, but when I checked my GPS, the screen flickered with strange symbols before going dark entirely. "My phone's acting up," I told Marcus when I finally caught up to him at a small clearing. He didn't look back. Good, that's the point. The campsite he'd chosen was a roughly circular clearing surrounded by towering pines and twisted oaks. In the center sat the crumbling stone foundation of what might have been a house, its walls barely knee-high and choked with briars. A rusty iron pump handle jutted from the ground nearby, and I could see the remains of other structures deeper in the woods, the skeleton of Corley's mill. "This place gives me the creeps," I said, dropping my pack beside the stone foundation. "Can't we find somewhere else?" Marcus was already setting up his tent, a large, military-style canvas shelter I'd never seen before. "This is perfect, isolated, private." He looked at me then, and his smile made my blood run cold. "No one will bother us here." I set up my own small backpacking tent on the opposite side of the clearing, telling myself I was being paranoid. Marcus had always been intense, but this felt different. Wrong. As the sun dipped below the tree line, the temperature dropped rapidly, and an unnatural silence settled over the forest. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I'll gather some firewood," Marcus announced as twilight deepened. He grabbed a headlamp and disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone in the growing darkness. That's when I heard the first sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from underground. I pressed my ear to the stone foundation and gasped. The sound was definitely coming from below, like something large moving in a space beneath the ruins. When Marcus returned 20 minutes later, his arms full of dead branches, I was sitting as far from the foundation as possible. "There's something under there," I said, pointing to the stones. "I heard." "You heard the wind," he interrupted, dumping the wood in a pile. "Old ruins make strange sounds. Settling, temperature changes. Perfectly normal." But as he built the fire, I noticed his hands were shaking, and when the flames finally caught, they burned an unnatural shade of blue-green that made both our faces look corpse-pale in the dancing light. "Marcus, the fire—" "It's just the minerals in the wood," he said quickly. "Iron deposits in the soil. Very common in Alabama." I wanted to believe him, but the fire gave off no heat despite the height of the flames, and the smoke smelled like sulfur and rotting meat. When I tried to move closer to warm myself, Marcus grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises. "Stay back," he hissed. Don't get too close." We ate a cold dinner of energy bars and trail mix, barely speaking. Marcus kept checking his watch and glancing toward the tree line as if expecting someone. When I asked him about it, he claimed he was just being cautious about wildlife, but I'd never seen him so jumpy. "I'm going to turn in," I finally said around 9 o'clock. The strange fire had died down to glowing embers that gave off an eerie phosphorescent light. "Good idea," Marcus replied, but he made no move toward his tent. "I'll keep watch for a while. Make sure we're safe." I crawled into my sleeping bag and tried to ignore the way the ground seemed to vibrate beneath me, like massive machinery running far below. Through the thin walls of my tent, I could see Marcus silhouetted against the weird green glow, sitting perfectly still and staring into the forest. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was waking to absolute silence. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you wonder if you've gone deaf. I checked my watch. 3:17 a.m. The fire had gone out completely, leaving the clearing in total darkness. "Marcus," I whispered. No response. I unzipped my tent flap and peered out. Marcus's tent was dark, its entrance gaping open like a mouth. The clearing was empty except for the pale gleam of the stone foundation in the starlight. My heart hammering, I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward his tent. It was empty, his sleeping bag unzipped from the inside and thrown aside as if he'd left in a hurry. His backpack was gone too, along with most of his gear. "Marcus," I called out, no longer caring about staying quiet. "Marcus, where are you?" My voice echoed strangely in the still air, seeming to come back distorted and multiplied. I swept my flashlight beam across the clearing and froze. There were footprints leading away from Marcus's tent, but they weren't quite right. They were Marcus's size and shape, but the gait was wrong. The stride too long, and there seemed to be too many impressions, as if he'd been walking on something other than two legs. The trail led directly into the ruins of the old settlement. I should have stayed put, should have waited until dawn and then hiked back to the car for help. But the thought of being alone in that clearing, with whatever was making the sounds beneath the foundation, terrified me more than following those twisted footprints into the darkness. I grabbed my jacket and a bottle of water, leaving everything else behind. The beam of my flashlight seemed pathetically weak as I picked my way through the overgrown ruins, following the disturbing trail. Broken foundations and collapsed walls jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and everywhere I looked I saw evidence of violence: scorch marks on stone, deep gouges in tree trunks, and stains on the ground that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The footprints led me deeper into the settlement, past the remains of what might have been a church or meeting house. The trail wound through a maze of crumbling walls and rusted debris, always heading toward the center of the ruins where a larger structure had once stood. I found Marcus at the heart of the old settlement, standing in front of the remains of what looked like an altar made of the same dark stone as the foundation back at our campsite. But it wasn't Marcus. Not really. He stood perfectly still, his back to me, and even from 20 feet away I could see that something was wrong with his silhouette. His proportions were off, his limbs too long, and when I moved my flashlight beam across him, his shadow fell in directions that defied the position of the light. "Marcus," I whispered. He turned around and I screamed. His face was Marcus's face, but wrong in every detail. The features were too sharp, the skin too pale, and his eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. When he smiled, I saw that his teeth had been filed to points and something dark dripped from the corners of his mouth. "Hello, Jenny," he said in Marcus's voice, but the words came out slightly off rhythm, as if he were lip-syncing to a recording. "I've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam wavering. What happened to you?" "Nothing happened to me," the thing wearing Marcus's face replied. "I happened to me. Do you know how long I've been watching? Waiting? Planning?" It took a step closer, and I could see that its feet weren't quite touching the ground. 3 years, Jenny. 3 years of pretending to be him, learning to move in his skin, speak with his voice. And you never knew. Never suspected. My mind reeled. 3 years, our entire relationship. "You're not Marcus," I breathed. "No," it agreed, tilting its head at an impossible angle. "Marcus died the night we met. Poor thing was hiking alone through these woods, just like you are now. I was so hungry then, so tired of wearing the faces of animals and madmen. But Marcus was perfect. Young, handsome, stable. The kind of man a woman like you would trust." I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead. The thing that had been wearing Marcus's face for 3 years laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Where are you going, darling? This is our special place, our anniversary trip. Don't you want to see what I have planned?" I forced my legs to move, crashing through the undergrowth as branches tore at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear it following. Not running, but gliding through the forest with inhuman grace. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran, illuminating nightmare glimpses of the ruined settlement. Symbols carved into trees, bones scattered in the underbrush, and everywhere that sickly, sweet smell of decay. I burst back into our campsite and dove for my phone, praying I could get a signal, but the device was completely dead. Not just out of battery, but fried, its screen cracked and components melted as if it had been struck by lightning. "The phones don't work here," the Marcus thing said conversationally as it emerged from the tree line. It moved differently now, no longer bothering to mimic human locomotion. Its limbs bent at wrong angles, and it seemed to flow rather than walk. Neither does the GPS, or the car, for that matter. I made sure of that before you woke up. I grabbed a burning branch from the remains of our fire, but the wood crumbled to ash in my hands. The thing laughed again. "Fire doesn't burn here anymore. Not real fire. This place belongs to older powers now, deeper hungers. It's been feeding for almost a century, growing stronger with each offering." "What do you want?" I demanded, backing toward the stone foundation. "What I've always wanted," it replied. "To feed, to grow, to become." Its form began to shift and blur, Marcus's features melting like wax. "But this body is wearing out. 3 years is a long time to maintain a human shape. I need something fresher." I realized with horror that it wasn't just talking about Marcus. It wanted me, not to kill me, but to wear me, to live inside my skin and use my face to hunt its next victim. The thought of this thing pretending to be me, using my voice to lure some other innocent person to their death, filled me with a rage that burned hotter than fear. "You sick bastard," I snarled. "You won't get away with this." "Who's going to stop me?" it asked, and now its voice was changing too, becoming something wet and kittenous. "The authorities. They think Marcus brought his girlfriend camping. When they find the remains, if they find them, it will look like a tragic accident. Wild animal attack maybe, or a fall from the cliffs. These woods have claimed so many over the years." The thing was right. We were miles from civilization, in an area most people avoided. Even if someone came looking, they'd never find us in time. But as I backed away from the shifting horror that had been my boyfriend, my heel struck something solid, the stone foundation. And beneath it, that rhythmic thumping was growing stronger. "You made one mistake," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You brought me to your feeding ground. But you're not the only hungry thing in these woods, are you?" The Marcus thing paused, its partially melted features showing something that might have been concern. I slammed my hiking boot down on the stone foundation as hard as I could. The impact sent shockwaves through the ground, and the thumping from below became a violent pounding. Cracks appeared in the ancient stones, spreading outward like a spider web. "What are you doing?" the thing shrieked, its voice now completely inhuman. "Waking up whatever you've been keeping down there," I replied, and stomped again. The foundation exploded upward in a shower of stone and earth. Something vast and dark erupted from the hole. Not quite tentacles, not quite roots, but a writhing mass of organic matter that had been trapped beneath the settlement for decades. It moved with desperate hunger, reaching for anything warm and alive. The Marcus thing tried to flee, but the tendrils were faster. They wrapped around its stolen form and began to drag it toward the gaping pit. As they touched it, the thing's disguise finally failed completely, revealing something that had never been human at all. A collection of shadows and hunger held together by malice and the stolen memories of its victims. "This isn't over," it screamed as the hungry darkness pulled it down. "I am eternal. I am—" Its words were cut off as the mass of writhing flesh dragged it into the pit. For a moment, I heard sounds from below that I hope never to hear again. Wet, tearing noises and screams that seemed to come from multiple throats. Then, silence. The hole began to fill itself, the disturbed earth flowing back like liquid until only a slight depression remained. The forest around me seemed to exhale, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I heard the normal sounds of the wilderness. An owl hooting in the distance, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But I wasn't safe yet. Dawn was still hours away, and I was alone in the woods with no phone, no GPS, and no idea which direction led back to the trailhead. Worse, I wasn't entirely sure the thing wearing Marcus's face had been lying about disabling our car. I gathered what supplies I could salvage and set off through the forest, using the North Star to navigate. It took me 6 hours of stumbling through the darkness, but eventually I found the trail. Our car was there, and though the battery was dead, I managed to get it started by rolling it downhill and popping the clutch. I drove straight to the Cullman County Sheriff's Department and told them my boyfriend had gone missing during our camping trip. I kept the story simple. We'd argued, he'd stormed off into the woods, and I hadn't been able to find him. A search team was organized, but they never found any trace of Marcus. Not surprising, since he'd been dead for 3 years. The thing that had been impersonating him had been thorough in its deception. It had Marcus's memories, his mannerisms, even his fears and dreams. But now that I knew what to look for, I could remember the little signs. The way it never seemed to sleep, how it never got sick, the fact that it never aged a day in the 3 years we were together. Most disturbing of all were the things I found when I searched our shared apartment. Hidden in a box beneath our bed were dozens of photographs of me taken without my knowledge. Sleeping, showering, going about my daily routine. There were also photos of other women, strangers whose faces showed the same trust and affection I must have shown. How many had it worn before Marcus? How many had it killed? The official investigation concluded that Marcus had likely fallen into one of the many sinkholes that dotted the Bankhead National Forest. His body was never recovered, and after a few months, the case was quietly closed. I moved to a different city, changed my job, and tried to rebuild my life. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision and turn to see nothing there. Or I'll hear footsteps following me down a dark street, only to find the sidewalk empty. Part of me wonders if that thing in the woods was telling the truth about being eternal, if some piece of it escaped before the hungry darkness below pulled it down. And sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly paranoid, I wonder about the other people in my life. The friendly barista who knows my coffee order by heart, the neighbor who always seems to be watching my apartment, the co-worker who asks too many personal questions. How can you ever really know if the person you're talking to is human? How can you be sure they're not something else, something hungry, wearing a stolen face and waiting for the perfect moment to drag you into the darkness? I guess you can't. All you can do is stay alert, trust your instincts, and remember that some hungers are never satisfied. They only grow stronger with each feeding. The thing in the woods taught me that there are worse fates than death. Sometimes the real horror isn't what kills you, it's what keeps you alive just long enough to watch it steal everything you are. 3 months after the incident, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, me, asleep in my new apartment, in my new city, with my new locks and security system. On the back, written in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 4 words: "Until we meet again." I keep the photograph on my nightstand now, a reminder that some shadows are patient enough to wait forever, and some hungers can never truly be destroyed, only delayed. The Bankhead National Forest is still open to the public. The area around Corley's Mill is still marked on the maps, though most hikers avoid it due to the difficult terrain and local folklore. The Forest Service has no record of any disappearances in recent years, but then again, they wouldn't. Would they? If you ever find yourself camping in those woods, pay attention to the things that seem wrong. The fires that burn the wrong color, the phones that die for no reason, the loved ones who come back from gathering firewood acting just a little bit different. And whatever you do, don't camp near the old stone foundations. Some hungers should stay buried, and some doors should never be opened, even when you're desperate enough to wake the darkness just to escape something worse, especially then.